Okay, so we don't lose track of time. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know Zoom isn't our typical way that Visa does online meetings, so people are probably delayed in getting online, but I want to give Ryan as much time as possible, as well as our distinguished panelists. So I'm Jen Smith. I'm Director of Strategic Initiatives in our Visa Accessibility team, and I lead two of our viable groups here at Visa. And I want to welcome our Global Viable event folks today. And we're covering here the unique experiences of deaf and hard of hearing customers and employees. I do have the honor of introducing our hosts today, Ryan Bonejo of ASL Now. Ryan and I have been in communications, I think, for close to a year and a half in thinking through how we can work together, highlight these perspectives, and it really is a dream to give the floor over to you, Ryan. So take it away.
Thanks, Jen. Honored to be here. My name is Ryan Bonheo. I work for Communication Services for the Deaf. Before we get started with introductions, I do want to mention two important things. Viewing this on gallery mode is going to be the best. So in the upper right-hand corner, click on view, and then you should see gallery mode. If it's on speaker mode, it's not going to work very well. If you have questions, use the Q&A feature on the bottom of the screen. You click on Q&A and type in your questions. So I, Ryan, am a fourth generation deaf individual, and being deaf is a full-time job. Accessibility is getting better and better over the years, but we still got work to do. And this panel is very important. I am excited to have everybody here. So we'll go ahead and get started with introductions. Ashley, do you want to start first?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me here. Hello, everyone. I'm pleased to be a part of this panel. My name is Dr. Ashley Walker, and I am a pharmacist and a pharmacy manager. I've been that so for 8 or 9 years now, and I use my experience as a pharmacist to help others in the healthcare field generally learn how to work with people who are deaf and hard of hearing.
Vicki?
Hi, hello everyone. I'm so excited to be a part of the panel today. It's a thrill to be here, and it's a wonderful opportunity to help you all, viewers, learn more about serving deaf and hard of hearing employees and customers.
Marius says, hello all. Thank you for welcoming me here. My name is Marius. This is my sign name. And I work for Visa and have for the last several years. I think I am the only deaf individual here, which has its challenges. I'd like to see that potentially change, hopefully from this webinar. Thank you. Ryan says, okay, first question to you all. What are some of the challenges that are faced by deaf and hard of hearing people on a daily basis? And what organizations or people are helping break down those barriers? Vicki, you want to start?
Would you mind just maybe rephrasing the question, because I couldn't really see very well clearly on the screen. Would you mind repeating?
Oh, sure. What are some of the common challenges that deaf and hard of hearing individuals face? And what are some companies or organizations that are helping break down those barriers?
Thanks, Ryan, for repeating the question. I appreciate that. So a common challenge faced is ignorance, meaning that people don't understand what it is to be deaf or hard of hearing. They think of deaf and hard of hearing people in broad terms instead of, working with us on an individual basis. And so there are people who are born deaf, all the way to, who may really identify as culturally deaf people who lose their hearing much later in life. And so there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all answer for the questions that you may have today, and about serving deaf and hard of hearing people and their unique needs and their unique forms of communication and the modes of communication that we use. And I would definitely identify that as a bigger challenge.
Ashley?
Yeah, I want to second what Vicky started us off with. Yes, deaf people are individual, and we all have our ways of moving through the world. And so I'll give you an example. The color blue, if I just say the word blue to you, each one of you is seeing a different color in your mind. And that's how deaf people are. So overcoming barriers means asking what works for each individual and asking each person to give an opinion and to, because there's no such thing as one size fits all.
Maria says, I second Vicky and agree with Ashley. I think that you have to ask individuals their preferred method and what works for them or what doesn't. It is entirely dependent on the person. But I would say the biggest challenge really is communication. How you communicate with somebody who can hear when you cannot. Yeah, thank you. Ryan says, so we can all agree that it's not a one size fits all approach. Vicki, did you have something else to chime in?
Yeah, something occurred to me. I just wanted to emphasize that folks shouldn't make assumptions about what deaf people can and cannot do. Please don't make assumptions. Also, think of people who are deaf as having a disability that is invisible. Oftentimes people don't know that I'm deaf until they start to interact with me. There's something that is commonly called the deaf voice. I mean, it doesn't sound like a hearing person talking to you. And so, you don't necessarily know that I'm deaf until you start to interact with me. People approach me in the grocery store when I'm shopping and, I'm not being rude if you're talking to me. I just didn't hear you. And so that's something that I wanted to emphasize is that deafness is an invisible disability. So don't make assumptions about people's behaviors and about where they are. This is Ashley. Yeah, I have been in many situations myself where, and I do typically speak for myself. I do speak English as well as use sign language. And so you have to be a really good lip reader in order to keep up with when other people are saying, if they're moving around, if they've got, certain facial expressions that are screwing up their lips. And so look at me, interact with me as an individual, give me your full face attention. And also I would love to see attitudinal changes in the community. People typically, when they figure out that I'm deaf, even though I'm totally normal, they get a little freaked out.
Ryan says, yeah, I was going to say, what the next question is, what is it that companies or organizations can do to continue breaking down those barriers, those silos? Yeah, Ashley.
Yeah, thanks. Open-mindedness. Can I just say open-mindedness? Changing the way that you do your daily job. And I'll give you an example. If somebody, comes in for an interview, you'll want to use an interpreter. And don't be quick to deny providing interpreting services when someone has a request for services that they need. Let's say if, and if you don't understand what it is that they need, it's okay to ask about someone's accessibility request, but don't jump to the answer no before you have asked questions. Do your due diligence. This is Vicky here. Yeah, this is Vicky here. I so agree with what Ashley is saying. Ask a person, what is it that you need? Don't assume and think, I can fill in the blanks myself and figure this out. Ask people what it is that they need to break down any barriers or provide access. Don't be shy about that. Don't be embarrassed in asking questions. I'd really rather that you come to me with your questions than jump to a conclusion. And that also, by the way, sets a tone. And isn't that the point?
Marius, do you have anything to add? He says, I would say that I agree with both of their comments. And for me in the workplace, I haven't been allowed to have interpreters. So people have to interact with me, and usually the first time when they come up to me, they say, "Can you read lips?" I'm like, yes, but slow, and limit how much you say. You know, the more and more I interact with a person on a daily basis, the more and more I'm able to read their lips, but it's not a fast going process. Having interpreters, we've had interpreter one time. But yeah, at the workplace for me, that's not been a possible thing. And then trying to have them explain workplace information, I'm like, okay, watch the interpreter, or take notes. Oh, rely on caption. I do rely on captions in work meetings, but they're automated captions and they're not always reliable. Let me actually back up. I'm from Japan, and people have accents, and their accents aren't always understood by automated speech recognition, which is another difficult thing.
Ooh, this is Ashley. I want to agree with Marius. It is so tough, and I have a similar struggle. It's not only sounds, but it's also eye movements. It's also accents. So I have an example. I oftentimes work with people who reside in Africa, and boy, what a challenge to follow. Just following a hearing person who's an American is tough enough, but lip reading, whoo.
Yeah, Vicky.
Yeah, this is Vicky. A lot of times in my trainings, I'm working with people internationally. I work a while ago, I worked in Washington, D.C. at Gallaudet University. And so we served people internationally. And then I went to Seattle and I continued training there. But I noticed in my travels that if let's say I'm showing a video on YouTube or something, the challenge of speech reading, there is a video called the Challenge of Speech Reading, and people finally get it. They don't realize what a terrible challenge it can be to read someone's lips. Even people who have training, it doesn't matter. There's still a lot of challenge, and it also kind of depends on the individual's experience. So again, that takes me sort of back to my previous point of don't make assumptions that all deaf people can read lips and just make it work. When it comes to communication, I second what Marius and Ashley are explaining about, lip reading is tough. And by the way, I'll also mention that there are times of day that my brain is fried, like the end of the afternoon. Don't come to me and make me read your lips. I'll probably be fresher in the morning. So, the context, if I know the context, if I'm in an environment that's over bright, or, I might prefer to close the blinds so that I can see better. So there might be some things that we can do to adapt the environment so that it gives me a better shot.
Very good points. So, fun fact, when you talk about accents, just FYI, sign language has its own accents as well. Different regions throughout the country have their own versions, their own styles of sign language. People from New York sign faster. People from the South have a draw. So just the same as spoken language.
Can I get in there? Can I?
Yeah.
Okay, I hate to interrupt you, but
no, bring it.
My brain, yeah, I'm on fire. So I want to sort of relate this to speech reading, and accents and sign language. So for example, when people who hear speak, their voice shows inflection, and that shows the tone of a message, right? And also they're giving each other clues and cues about what it is they're trying to go for in their message. Well, deaf people have to rely on the interpreter's interpretation of that tone or those cues and clues. Similar to the use of sign language. Sometimes, we misinterpret what someone's trying to say to us. Sometimes, things don't turn out just right. I remember one time ago, I was, this is an example story about vocal inflection, right? I was having a conversation about tone of voice that can be used to communicate, also appearing in signed language. And so I remember there was a time that, a gentleman stood up and he told this story, and he didn't realize that hearing people had that information, that intonation happens when people speak to one another. He didn't realize that. And so sometimes, if you see somebody signing really fast with an angry face, it might be threatening, but sometimes it could just be a really super fun story. And so this person was telling about, that he learned this when he was in school and he got written up. And, the manager, sorry,
You
not
had
in
to
school,
go
but
to anger management training. Wow.
he had to go to anger management training. He had to submit a written apology because he had signed too excitedly and it came across as anger. But isn't that just the same as tone of voice? So I just wanted to make that analogy.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Wow, that's fantastic. Oh, yeah, Ashley.
Yeah, about that. Sound for deaf and hard of hearing people is a visual experience. We use the full body to communicate. Anger, happiness, all of it is visual.
That leads me to my next question. And it is, what are the best practices for inclusive communication with your deaf customers and employees? What do you think the best practices are? Let's start with Marius. Me? Marius says. Okay, all right. Let me think about this.
I'll say something, Ashley. It kind of it varies depending on the work that you do. Sorry, this is Ashley. So it varies depending on the work that you do. And for example, my role as a pharmacist, I'm hospital based. I work in a hospital building. And so I round with the doctor's team and I do not have an interpreter. So and also rounding happens on the move. So people talking on the move and oftentimes wearing masks. So I've learned how to depend on technology to support my needs, although it's super tiring because my brain is going twice as fast trying to take in all the information, figure out who's saying what about whom, and what's attributed to which patient. So I would have to say it kind of depends on the work that you do. Are you working with a small group of people or a large group of people? If it's one-on-one, one-on two or three even, I've got a way better shot than a large group.
Okay, back to Marius. He says, well, first off, I agree with Ashley about in the work setting. I remember the first time trying to read lips of a coworker and struggling, and then people trying to explain to me over and over and over, and me helping them with that, and it slowly morphing over time, and then also them writing back and forth with me. But I understand that they literally can't write out the entire meeting, and that the writing back and forth needs to be kind of short things of what was said or what they want to say. I also use Teams. I use the Microsoft Teams chat at work. So people can reach out to me that way. They can send me a DM, they can email me. But for me to participate in a meeting, I rely on the auto captions, but as I said, auto captions are definitely not 100%. It depends on people's accents, how many people are in the room. If any people are talking at the same time, it's going to have less and less accuracy depending on each one of those things. So I would say that, I told this to my manager, that during meetings, I will be a part of the meeting, but I'm probably not going to be actively participating. Whereas a one-on-one, normally they're 30 minutes. Let's extend it to be 45 minutes because there's obviously some communication things that might take a little bit longer. I don't understand stuff. So, and then it makes it so that my manager can type back and forth with me, and that's okay. Vicky?
Oh boy, I've got so much in my head that I want to say. Wow, both of these types of challenges, I agree 100%. You nailed it. Um, so I always try to emphasize to employees, customer service reps, and the like that time and patience are absolutely imperative part of the recipe. Um, Communicating in person with someone from another country who's not an English speaker struggles in the same way. Uh, so emphasizing the use of an interpreter, um, knowing that it's a physical and mental job, jumping back and forth between two languages. And I'll give you a demonstration. So let's say a speaker is speaking and the signer is signing the interpretation, or vice versa. You guys asking me questions and I'm looking at the interpreter and the interpreter signs that question to me. It does take time for that process of translanguaging to happen. And also it takes a moment for me to take a breath with, formulate an answer before I can speak up. So patience, time, just slow down, show respect.
Yeah, Ashley.
Yeah, related to that, about the customer's perspective, I'd kind of want to talk about that. A customer who is really good with using English is not the same as a person who's really skilled at ASL. Um, Whether someone's, if someone is raised using ASL and that's their first language, they may be a very bright person, but their English may not come across perfectly clear because that's a second language. So remember, you are a native English user. So if you were to pick up your hands and sign, it might not be perfectly grammatically accurate. And the same goes for a person who is an ASL user. Their English it may be imperfect.
Yeah, English is often deaf people's second and third language, but people just assume that when they go to a website, oh, all of the information is there in English. Yeah, it doesn't mean the deaf person is going to be able to navigate that and find that information on their own. Vicky, did you want to say something?
I do. I want to add to that, again, about when I was a trainer, we hired a woman who spoke beautiful English, spoke very clear, spoke very well. She was a deaf person, but she spoke English very well. And also, she read lips, and she rose through the company until, and she was sending a business email out at one point, and the supervisor that she sent it to was mortified to find out that her English writing skills did not particularly match her English speaking skills. Her emails were grammatically incorrect and had many, many mistakes in English writing. So she had to explain to that person, look, yes, I am hard of hearing. I do speak to communicate. I speak English, but it's not, English isn't my first language. Signed visual language is my first language. So again, don't make assumptions.
Yeah, so true. This is Ryan. Marius, did you want to say something? Marius says, I do have another point that I wanted to add. If each method of communication or avenue that you're trying to take to communicate fails, there will probably be an app for it. You can pull out your phone and have it do, like a voice memo and translate the voice memo for you. It's not 100% successful, but because depending on the environment that you're in, if there's noise and whatnot, but it could still be a little bit quicker than typing it all out. And this is again, if everything else that you've tried fails. Ryan says, remember, if your deaf customer tells you that they prefer the chat option, that doesn't mean every deaf customer prefers the chat option. Don't assume that because one told you, it means it applies to all. Some prefer ASL for support, others prefer the chat option. It varies. Does anybody have anything that they want to add about this question before I move on to the next topic? All right, we're going to move on to the next topic. So we are in 2024 and technology is changing as rapidly as ever. So what are some of the technologies that the audience should be aware of to potentially use supporting their deaf and hard of hearing customers and employees? Ashley, Vicky, Marius, do you have anything? Yeah? Marius says, compared to a few years ago, AI has definitely come to take its place in this world. And I'm hoping that with AI, there's going to be more things that support deaf people. Automated captions are one thing. Instead of having an actual captioner making those captions, doing it automated. Teams, using Microsoft Teams as, chat. That's beneficial as well. It's not 100% yet, but I do feel like it's getting better. It's improving. I had a thought and it's escaped me. Go on to somebody else and it'll come back. Ryan says, we'll come back to you, Marius. Ashley?
Yes. Technology is a deaf or hard of hearing person's best friend. It has given us unimaginable access, but I have noticed that on some jobs, they're not always such great experiences. For example, a company might not be willing to cover the cost. And most time it's a one-time cost for a purchase of technology. Basically, it's a simple introduction and installation of a video phone, for example. If someone prefers a teletype machine, which is really antiquated technology, that very few people use that anymore, but they might prefer to install that. And this, this speeds up our ability to work if we have better technologies. Don't give us the antiquated dinosaur technologies, right? Nobody wants to be falling behind. And like you said, it's 2024, right? Everybody's got a cell phone, and everybody who is deaf and hard of hearing on their mobile phone can use a video phone. We can pull up a third party, an interpreter on the screen, so that we can make calls through a video phone using a mobile phone. And also you can call us.
I still see on commercials for deaf and hard of hearing people, call 711 or TTY phone number, connect with us this way, which is frustrating because when we do call those companies, we don't have a TTY anymore. So them advertising for us to get a hold of them that way is also antiquated. There's new stuff every day. I don't know everything, but I learn something new every day, and I think companies should be doing the same thing. And yes, learn something new every day. This is Ryan. Thank you. Vicky?
Oh, Ashley's so right. Technology is ever evolving through the times, through the years. Obviously you can take one look at me, you know that I'm 60 plus, and I feel like I am in a chase with technology, trying to keep up with what's out there, with what's new, with what's being released, what's updated, what's effective, what's non-effective. And I'm learning it through the deaf younger generations. For example, LinkedIn. LinkedIn has really helped me because there are so many deaf people out there who aren't on LinkedIn. So, I'm wondering, where are young people getting their information? If they're not on LinkedIn, where are they? I know that somebody recently released a QR code that gives you access to an interpreter through a QR code. Sorensen is a large company that provides interpreting services, and so you can use a QR code to get to Sorensen and interpreters. I'm wondering how that happens. And I'm wondering, if do other non-tech savvy deaf people know about this? We, the deaf community, and those who are tech savvy in the community really need to come together and exchange some information, have some conversation, provide support to one another so that we can all have this shared information and have access to understanding.
This is Ryan. Yeah, back to Ash's point about the TTY. It's funny, the TTY does still technically exist, but it's not a reality of something it's rarely used by the deaf community. So if you think about in the 1990s, everybody had pagers, right? And everybody was using pagers. And today you don't see anybody carrying around a pager anymore. That's basically the same idea as a TTY. So when companies, especially still on commercials today, reach to us through TTY, it's like, cool, through our 1990s device. Awesome. No, actually very frustrating. Marius, back to you on this. Marius says, oh, the TTY. Here in Japan, there aren't really TTYs. Deaf people don't use TTYs. But if there is a crisis and you need to communicate, then you can. I don't really know Japanese Sign Language very well, so I would need to communicate in English. So yeah, it's difficult. It was like I would have to go through some American Sign Language, but so I think it's 2024 and technology is becoming very advanced. I hope that people realize that the TTY is antiquated and that we don't really use it. But I think that I guess I should say, that technology continues to advance in a way that benefits the deaf community. Ryan says, Vicky, Ashley, is there anything about virtual reality services that you'd like to talk about? Interpreter clarification here. Video relay service interpreters. Ashley, Vicky.
Yeah, this is Ashley. So for me, as a customer or a consumer, I use what they call VCO, voice carryover, especially when it's job related. And that's because my work colleagues, I want to speak to them and use my voice. They know me and they're used to me, so they can hear my voice and voice carryover. With some people, I would prefer to sign. And so, but making calls is pretty easy, calling out, but receiving calls, for whatever reason, it's a struggle. Sometimes the calls don't get through. It seems like when people are trying to make a call and they dial my number and then it goes to the third party because an interpreter picks up first, they wind up hanging up. So then I wind up calling back and I say, and they'll say, do you know the party's extension number? Which I actually don't, because I don't know who called me. So it's a missed opportunity for me. And if it's job related, that's extra unfortunate. If it was related to a job interview, can you imagine how many jobs I would have missed out on? So I don't know the resolution to that issue, but I continue to give out my phone number. I sometimes give them another person's phone number, like my parent, who my mother will take messages for me. And, they call my mom and they give her my number and I wind up calling them back through my technology. I don't know what that is. If it's a closed-mindedness or a misunderstanding about what VRS is, the interpreter identifies themselves. But if you're making a call and let's say, I'm going to call, if you hear somebody pick up the phone and they say, hi, this is Sorensen Video Relay Service, and I'm interpreter number 4659, then you will realize, oh, that person's a deaf person, and I am calling a person who is using an interpreter to communicate. Don't hang up the phone. That's such a frustration on our end on these missed calls.
Agreed. Vicky?
Yeah, this is Vicky. I agree with that frustration. And I'll just be honest, I avoid making phone calls if email is an option. Because if I email, then I'm guaranteed to get to that person. I can reach them through an email, whether when I've rather that when I call, they misunderstand and they wind up hanging up on me time and time again. And communication just doesn't happen. So, or the information doesn't happen clearly and things are missing and I'm not really making my point clearly because I'm talking through an interpreter. So, if it's a matter of time, I'll email every time.
This is Ryan. Imagine those deaf people though who aren't fluent in English and VRS is their option. Kind of scary. So the video phone is a technology commonly used by deaf people. Deaf people have their own phone numbers connected to their video phone. So I, Ryan, have two different phone numbers actually. I have my iPhone's phone number that you can text me on, and then I have my video phone number that you could call me on. So it's often confusing for companies as well as deaf individuals of like, which phone number do I give you? Are you going to be texting me or are you going to be calling me? It's frustrating for deaf customers. Ashley.
Yeah, this is Ashley. Yeah, I simply tell people to text me, but I find it strange that many companies now will text you reminders like you've got a doctor's appointment coming up, press C to confirm or whatever, things like that. You've seen it. And I'm just wondering, why is it so hard for you to understand that I only communicate through text if you're going to send me a text anyway? Or if, I, for example, ask to change my appointment, I could just text your front desk. Why is that so difficult? Or sometimes I'll make a request. Can you please put a note in my information that I only receive text, and then they don't ever change it or they don't ever use it. I want information. I need to know information. And if you call me on this number, I can't understand you. So don't do that. Sometimes video phones aren't as dependable as we want them to be because maybe I don't have a good signal, there's lousy Wi-Fi, and then everything freezes. And so making a call to me is not as effective as just texting me, right? So I don't know how to solve that problem, but just mentioning it.
Yeah, good point. Marius, do you want to add? This is Marius speaking. I will say communication, getting calls is difficult. I also opt for I prefer an email instead of a phone call, direct communication. But in my work, I also have people who ask me for my phone number. And I'm like, okay, yes, I have a phone number, but here in Japan, you're going to try to call me and I'm deaf. Just email me. It's going to be better. Or even in the days of fax, faxing is still kind of a thing here in Japan. I'm like, send me a fax. Yeah, that's how I am at work. I don't want to get a phone call. I do connect on Teams. So if there are other people, for example, using Teams and they call into my Teams number, that I'll get an alert and then that will have automated captions for me. So that kind of works. But yeah, people ask me about calling on the phone and I'm like, listen, I don't speak for myself. I don't use my voice. So we wouldn't be having a conversation that way, a spoken conversation. I'm going to be relying on the text. A lot of large companies, even some of the medium-sized companies here in Japan, make it so that you can't really get appointments or converse with international individuals. So that's also why I have to keep explaining that I'm in Japan. Things are a little bit different than it would be in India or somewhere else. Ryan says, last comment when we wrap up, before we wrap this question. Vicky?
Sure. You know, we spend our lifetimes explaining that we're deaf and that we have needs, and it's like a broken record. I feel like we spend so much time, so much energy trying to, even while we're on the job, so much time, so much energy fighting for access, fighting with employers, fighting with companies, so that we can get what we need that makes us better employees. And I can't speak for all deaf people, but please, if I come to you, an employer, with a request, listen to me. I want to be a better employee.
Hi, this is Ryan. I have a few questions from the audience. So we're gonna take some audience questions now. So they're asking if the video phone has transitioned to being an app on your iPhone.
This is Ashley, meaning, can I have a video phone on my iPhone or my
Yeah,
mobile phone?
is it an app that you use on your phone?
Yeah. So I have a couple of devices, depending on where I am, if I'm at work or I'm at home, but my app uses the same login information that I have my profile from home. So it knows who I am, and but it works best with online services. It works best. It can work on the iPhone. So let's say that I'm on my iPhone, and once I leave and I'm not connected to the local Wi-Fi, you know how a picture gets really grainy on the screen because it's a video connection, right? So it'll freeze. So I try to avoid that because I'm on the move.
For sure. Vicky?
Yeah, I would say the same.
Marius? Yep, same thing. Ryan says, are there apps that you can download, and interpreter clarifying here. There are video relay service apps that you can download on your iPhone. This is different than it's going to be a different number than your iPhone number is. It's your video phone number that you have registered for through the FCC. But again, yes, you do want to have a hardline connection, internet connection, not just Wi-Fi or cell service as your video phone. Ashley? Yeah?
Yeah, I've been in situations in which the person who can hear will say, "You want to FaceTime?" And I say, "Sure, I don't mind FaceTime," but I rely on lip reading. And so now, with captions, sometimes I'm missing, I can't see, or so if I'm talking to my parents with captions on, no problem. If I'm talking to my colleagues with captions on, no way. Too much room for mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, added to that, isn't it always that the deaf person is emburdened with finding ways to effectively communicate instead of sharing that responsibility?
So true. Okay, next question is there any technology out there that you feel like benefits deaf and hard of hearing customers or employees, or that could benefit deaf and hard of hearing employees? The audience would like to know.
This is Ashley speaking. I think it depends on what you're using it for. And the type of work that you do as well. Because here's what I'm thinking, just as an example. It's no secret, there is an interpreter shortage. There's way too many deaf people to have so few interpreters. We need interpreters. So I appreciate trying to avoid using interpreters until I really, really need one. So if there's, technologies that can stand in. So for example, there's a new company that's invented these new glasses that they're called X-Ray. But anyhow, so it has captions that appear on the lens of the glass.
I've seen those. They're cool. New.
Right? In real time. So, and a beautiful example is my son, who recently got pretty sick and didn't have time to call an interpreter. I took him directly to the doctor without an interpreter there. And I had those X-ray glasses with me. X-R-A-I, by the way, X-ray glasses with me. And so I go into the doctor's office so that I can watch the captions, and it was handy. And it also saves the conversations afterwards so that I can go back. If my husband says, "Hey, what happened at the doc?" I can say, "Well, here you go."
Here, put
So
on
it
these glasses, partner.
Right, right. Yes, you can archive the conversation. So technology does have many unbelievable applications, and so what's there is phenomenal, but it's not perfect for all situations all the time.
Yeah, Vicky.
Just you're emphasizing my point for me. I did not know about that, Ashley. You have just taught me something. We have to spread the word to the deaf community about this new technology. Yeah, there's that, there's X-ray, but there's also, I mean, there's plenty of others. But I'll tell you what's sad about all of this. You see these advertisements, they're on the internet, but they're not on television. Oh, geez. And the reason is, if it's not on the television, it's not getting out there, and I might not know about it if I'm a television watcher.
Ryan says, yeah, there's a lot of information that's being shared on the internet that isn't shared on the TV. And interpreter shortages is really, really a thing nationwide. I agree. All right, next question. How do we better serve deaf and hard of hearing customers over the phone who are dealing with their financial information? How do we give training in that regard? So how do we handle deaf and hard of hearing people's sensitive information?
This is Vicky. I think Marius is probably best equipped to answer that. This is Ashley. Yeah, this is Ashley. I don't know if it's a generational thing, and it definitely could be. Nowadays, most people, if you're using a credit card and you have fraud, or it's going to show up on your phone, right? Everybody gets a ping to their phone. Sometimes if it's a fraudulent situation, it calls and leaves a voicemail. And that's something that leaves out the deaf and hard of hearing community, unless we take our phone to somewhere so that they can, somebody can listen to it and sign it for us. My bank card, I have to get somebody to call for me, and they refuse to talk to a family member because it's a male's voice and it's a female name. And so we wind up not being able to resolve the issue on the phone. What am I supposed to do about that, right? I don't talk on the phone, period, not ever. Power of attorney, do I need to get a POA? Even if I did, they still wouldn't accept it. So then what do I do? So I still have not solved that mystery right there.
I swear all deaf people run into that same problem. I'm Ryan, and when I call through video relay service, I often get a female interpreter, so a female voice, who calls the bank, my credit card company, right? And they're like, this doesn't sound like Ryan, and they disconnect the call. Yep, regular occurrence, very frustrating. Vicky?
Yeah, I did want to explain something. I had a terrible experience. This happened to me a couple of years ago. It's a long story, but the moral of the story is I was on my daughter's bank account because my daughter was she was doing some travel for 5 months. And so I was on her account. So I was doing her banking, paying bills and whatnot on her behalf. Well, it just so happened she had identity theft. My name got involved, even though it was blocked from my daughter's account, but somehow, so I had to go to the bank. We went round and round and round and round. I had to fight to get these charges cleared. And my daughter, she finally came home from her travels, and we went to the bank, and she is a speaking and hearing person. And so she laid out for them what had happened, the whole story. They began an investigation, and it turns out that a woman had taken my full name, but had put the wrong date. She had the month right and the year right, but she had the wrong birth date, day of the week. And the address was a different city that I had never actually lived in. And that address was in
St. Paul. Oh,
St. Paul, which I've never lived there. So anyhow, the bank president gave me the police, they made a police report, they gave me the report and said, well, it's not a priority. There are too many other things going on. And to this day, I can't open my bank account with this new bank with my own name because I've been flagged. And otherwise, I have a perfect history. So and honestly, the bottom line is because I'm a deaf woman and my identity got stolen, I've been going through this rigmarole. You know, the legal language, I don't understand all that stuff. I'm a very bright and educated woman, but reading legalese and navigating through all of the requirements that the bank had for me, such a headache.
yeah. Yeah, this is right. Marius? Marius says, just to add in, yeah, I do have some experience, probably like 20 years ago. Somebody stole my credit card, or at least my credit card information. I end up getting a bill and seeing like $3,000 worth of charges that I know aren't me. So then I have to make all these calls to the bank and keep getting hung up on as a deaf person calling my bank because they don't believe that it's me. Finally, after 4 times of getting hung up on, I get transferred to a supervisor. I explain, that I'm a deaf person and that my credit card information has been stolen. And it took a good amount of investigation for them to actually believe me and then resolve it. We ended up getting rid of that credit card, completely changing my credit card numbers, etc. And I said, is there any way that you can flag my account so that you know that I'm deaf? So then the next time I have to call in, you'll accept a call from an interpreter. They said that they were going to make a note of it. I consequently never had any issues after. I don't know. I don't know if that's still going to be on my account or not. Ashley?
Yeah, this is Ashley. I wanted to add, a person who is deaf, a person who uses video relay services to make calls, and for example, trying to call an office, trying to call a pharmacist, trying to call a help desk. And if they say, can I see my chart, please? It's not evident that that person is deaf. That is hidden information, or they just never look. So that frustration that they're experiencing just continues and repeats itself over and over and over again. You can call me, you can email me, you can text me, but if it's not insulting. But what's insulting is that I have to continually try to get my needs met and explain myself every time.
Yeah, this is so true. With financial transactions and interpreters being involved, it is very important for companies to understand that the interpreters who is calling isn't one of your employees. They're not an employee of the deaf person either. So they're not a company employee. So it's really kind of scary for deaf people to actually make those calls using an interpreter. I think that's important for companies to remember. We are about out of time. Is there any final comments that any of you want to add before we wrap?
Yeah, this is Ashley here. I think the point that we've been trying to make is please keep an open mind. And if you don't know, that's okay. Ask. If you've got questions, ask. It might sound silly, but deaf and hard of hearing people, you can't help us if you don't understand the problem. You can't fix the problem if you don't understand the problem. So, we are all learning. It's okay. We can all figure things out, adjust, and do better. And this is Vicky. I second that emotion.
Very true. Very true. We have a few questions that we didn't answer because we ran out of time, but don't worry. we will get you some answers soon. We have the questions documented and we'll reach out to you. Thank you so much for coming to this panel. And remember, it's not a one-size-fits-all answer.
That's right. Hey, thanks for having us.
Thank you all. Thank you for joining us.